When he's not making us laugh uncontrollably, he's keeping a close eye on some very valuable material. This is how Steve Martin went from curious young man to comedy legend. Stephen Glenn Martin was born in 1945 in Texas, but he grew up in Orange County, California. That meant he wasn't far from Disneyland, where he worked from ages 10 to 18. He initially sold guidebooks at the entrance and then graduated to demonstrating souvenir lassos in Frontierland before moving on to performing magic tricks at Merlin's Magic Shop.
I could spend the rest of the day in the park for free.
When Martin was 18, he landed a gig at nearby Knott's Berry Farm, performing in a stage production that ran 4 times each day and 5 times on Sundays. After each of those shows, he put on his own 10-minute performance that combined magic, banjo music, and comedy. It was essentially an early version of the act that would later catapult him to superstardom. After graduating from high school, Steve Martin enrolled in junior college. He befriended a classmate named Stormy, who encouraged him to read the W. Somerset Maugham novel, The Razor's Edge. As Martin recalled to Newsweek in 1978, it was all about a person who questions life. I read it and I can remember afterwards sitting in a park and Stormy saying, "Knowledge is the most important thing there is." That's when I really decided to go to college. Martin gravitated towards philosophy, although he ultimately concluded that attempting to understand all the different schools of philosophical thought was pointless. He transferred to UCLA in 1967 and decided to change his major to theater. He also began performing in Los Angeles comedy clubs, although his entry into stand-up was somewhat accidental. As he told Rolling Stone in 1982, "I was figuring out a way to get on stage. I made up a magic act and, hey, I'm in showbiz." And that led to nightclubs. When Steve Martin was 21, he got a bit of a lucky break when a dancer he was dating connected him to Mason Williams, head writer for the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. Williams was impressed enough to give Martin a job, sort of. As Martin recalled to The Hollywood Reporter in 2017, "I was hired, but not hired. I got $300 a week, which was about 3 times more than I'd ever made in my life. I found out later that Mason was paying me out of his own pocket."
I think it was the great showman Flo Ziegfeld who said, "A man never stands so tall as when he stoops to help someone else."
Martin eventually found his groove as a writer and also managed to appear on camera a few times, whether in sketches or showcasing his magic and juggling skills. But he yearned for something more. While he continued to hone his stand-up act, his career stagnated. He decided to leave LA and wound up in Aspen, Colorado. He decided to stop being the opening act for other performers and only headline his own shows. His income took a bit of a plunge, but he slowly began building up a following. By 1975, Steve Martin was a star on the rise. He also began earning a reputation for wacky stunts. In particular, there was the time he invited his entire audience to accompany him to McDonald's, where he ordered 247 burgers and then changed it at the last minute to a single order of fries. Martin realized the political counterculture shtick that ruled comedy around this time was wearing thin. So he shed the hippie persona that he had adopted by cutting his hair short, shaving his beard, and donning the white suit that would become his onstage uniform. As he later wrote in his memoir, Born Standing Up, "Instead of looking like another freak with a crazy act, I now looked like a visitor from the straight world who had gone seriously awry." Martin's act evolved into what was essentially a parody of stand-up, as he played an idiot who was so bad at comedy that his ineptitude was actually hilarious. And plenty of people were starting to take notice, as evidenced by his 1976 HBO special, Steve Martin Live at the Troubadour, and his 1977 platinum-selling comedy album, Let's Get Small. On October 23, 1976, Steve Martin made his hosting debut on Saturday Night Live. His antic comic sensibilities meshed perfectly with the cast members of the rebellious sketch comedy show. He was soon invited back, as he eventually went on to host 8 times in the show's first 5 seasons. As of 2024, he's hosted a total of 16 times, second most of anyone in SNL history. Martin has also honed a few recurring characters, perhaps most notably when he teamed up with Dan Aykroyd as the wannabe playboy Fest-Drunk brothers.
We are two wild and crazy guys!
As Martin once recalled to CBS Sunday Morning, the typical size of his live audiences at the time was about 3,500 people. But the day after his first SNL appearance, that number doubled. As he put it, "I walked out and there was this cheer. It scared me. Then I understood the power of SNL and television. It just completely changed everything. By the early 80s, there was no bigger comedian than Steve Martin. He was the only comic at that point to sell out Madison Square Garden. But then he quit. By that point, his act had become so well known that the only way he could continue would be to come up with a whole new one. But he wasn't up to it, and Hollywood was beckoning. So Martin teamed up with comedy legend Carl Reiner, who directed him in 1979's The Jerk. They collaborated once again for the film noir parody Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, the mad scientist comedy The Man with Two Brains, and the body swap comedy All of Me. Reiner passed away at the age of 92 in 2020. Martin memorialized his friend in the New York Times as he wrote, "I've known only two perfect people in my life. One is that son of Martin Short, the other is Carl Reiner." Once Steve Martin quit stand-up comedy and began making movies, he never looked back. He experienced his fair share of both hits and misses, but his batting average at the box office was pretty high for quite a while. Some of his most notable successes in the 80s include Three Amigos, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Roxanne, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, and Parenthood. And the hits just kept on coming throughout the 90s, as Martin starred in the likes of LA Story, Father of the Bride Part 2, and Bowfinger. The latter featured him teaming up with another comedy and Saturday Night Live legend in the form of Eddie Murphy. Heading into the 2000s, Martin's impressive run on the big screen still wasn't over, as he was a leading man once more in Cheaper by the Dozen and its sequel, The Pink Panther and its sequel, and Shopgirl, the latter of which was based on a novella that he wrote. Steve Martin branched out into the literary world in 1979 with the publication of his first book, the short story and essay collection Cruel Shoes. Then, in the 1990s, he began publishing essays in The New Yorker, which were collected in the 1998 book Pure Drivel. He followed that up with The Pleasure of My Company and Shopgirl. Then, in 2007, Martin wrote a memoir, Born Standing Up, which detailed his childhood, early showbiz ambitions, and the superstardom he eventually achieved. In 2010, the novel An Object of Beauty was released, and then 2020 saw the publication of A Wealth of Pigeons, a collection of syndicated single-panel comics produced alongside cartoonist Harry Bliss. He worked with Bliss again for his 2022 memoir, Number One is Walking, which picked up where his earlier autobiography left off.
I'm the writer, and Harry is the director, the cinematographer, the costumer, the prop department, and lighting.
While Steve Martin was carving out a side gig as a writer of fiction and nonfiction, he was also crafting material for live theater. His own theatrical experience can be traced back to his time at Knott's Berry Farm in the 1960s. But he eventually found himself treading the boards at a far more prestigious venue, New York City's Lincoln Center. That was where he starred alongside fellow comedian Robin Williams in a production of the Samuel Beckett play, Waiting for Godot. Martin followed that up by writing a full-length play of his own, called Picasso at the Lapine Asile, which was first staged in 1993 at Chicago's Steppenwolf Studio Theater. He then wrote The Underpants, an adaptation of the 1910 German farce Die Hose, which made its debut off-Broadway in 2002. Then came Bright Star, a bluegrass musical that premiered at Vassar College in 2013. In 2017, Martin finally saw one of his plays mounted on the Great White Way when Meteor Shower opened on Broadway. It boasted a cast that included the likes of Amy Schumer and Keegan-Michael Key.
Sometimes you go to bed the night before the first preview going, I can't think of one funny thing in this play.
The banjo has been a key ingredient in Steve Martin's comedy career right from the start. But it wasn't until the late 2000s that he really began to demonstrate his musical chops in a non-comedic setting. In 2009, he released the bluegrass album The Crow, New Songs for the Five-String Banjo. It featured original compositions from Martin, as well as a who's who of bluegrass talent, and even has an appearance by country music legend Dolly Parton. Martin embarked on a tour, and The Crow ended up winning a Grammy for Best Bluegrass Album. Then, in 2011, Martin teamed up with the bluegrass outfit The Steep Canyon Rangers for a collaborative album called Rare Bird Alert, which featured special guest appearances by Paul McCartney and the Chicks. Martin followed that up with a couple of joint albums with singer-songwriter Edie Brickell, 2013's Love Has Come For You, and 2015's So Familiar. And then he reunited with the Steep Canyon Rangers in 2017 for the long-awaited album. As he noted to the Los Angeles Times that year, when you think about it, everything I've done really came from one of two things, the love of comedy and the banjo.
Okay, my banjo's in the dressing room.
Steve Martin purchased his first painting when he was just 21. He was hooked, and over the years, he's amassed more and more art, to the point that he eventually became one of the world's foremost collectors. As he admitted to Time magazine in 1987, "Art is so different from what I do that it's an escape for me. Paintings exist in space. Show business exists in time." In 2001, Martin opened up his hobby to the public with a special exhibition of 28 pieces from his collection at the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas. The selections included works from the likes of David Hockney, Pablo Picasso, and underground comic book artist R. Crumb. As Martin told the New York Times, his motivation for displaying these pieces was simply so that others could enjoy them as much as he did. Steve Martin has had various romantic entanglements over the years with some very high-profile women. He was in a long-term relationship with his The Jerk co-star Bernadette Peters in the 70s and 80s. And he's also been linked to singers Linda Ronstadt and Karen Carpenter, actors Anne H., Kristen Davis, and Helena Bonham Carter, and artist Cindy Sherman. As for marriage, Martin has tied the knot twice. The first time in 1986 with British actor Victoria Tennant, his co-star in All of Me and LA Story. They ultimately divorced in 1994. Then, in 2007, he married longtime girlfriend Anne Stringfield in a surprise ceremony attended by the likes of Tom Hanks, Eugene Levy, and Diane Keaton. While talking about his wife with People magazine in 2015, Martin admitted, "She makes it all possible. She has one of the most important qualities a person can have, and that's kindness." In 2012, Martin and Stringfield welcomed a daughter named Mary. He was 67 at the time, but he still had plenty on the horizon to keep him busy, including the hit Hulu series Only Murders in the Building, which premiered in 2021. However, as he admitted to The Hollywood Reporter in 2022, "When this television show is done, I'm not going to seek others. This is weirdly it."